Danielle DiMartino Booth has written a book that is a must-read called Fed Up, The Insider's Take on Why the Federal Reserve is Bad for America. What is coming? What is your retirement look like? What does America look like when the lie is finally revealed? Somebody from the inside who predicted the 2008 crash is here to tell us what's coming next. Danielle DiMartino Booth joins us right now. Danielle, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. I
had you last week on television, and you took the breath away of the audience that was in for the show. And you are somebody that I wish I would have known in 2006 as I searched the world for anyone who is brave enough to say, the emperor has no clothes. And now you are doing it again, except this time you really have a ton of credibility because you've already predicted the last one. And you became really very important to the Dallas Fed. And you were on the inside doing all of the research and really trying to warn everyone inside. This thing is The Emperor Has No Clothes, Part 2. I want to start, before we get to your dire warning and some of the amazing stories of what it was like behind the scenes with TARP and everything else, I want to start with you looking up at the stars in Maine saying, I'm an accomplice. I'm complicit in this. I've got to get out and warn people.
Except I had just signed on for 4 more years at the time. Richard Fisher was certainly considered to be a maverick, and it had become exceedingly difficult to do my job. The PhDs, the academics in the research department were increasingly saying, somebody's got to put a muzzle on this woman. She's saying things that are going to embarrass us in Washington, D.C., among the most elite of the elite. And so what Fisher did was recognize what was going on. He wanted to maintain this one voice of objectivity, if you will. So he jettisoned me from the research department and gave me autonomy in exchange for staying through his last year at the Fed. He said, I'll give you freedom. You give me 4 more years. And I said, fine, done, deal.
So what did that feel like? Why did you do that? You knew it, at least after that you signed it, you started to reflect and go, I am part of this.
Well, I was part of the minority.
Right.
I mean, I was part of
if it's not me,
the fight
who
never
will?
ended.
Right.
The fight kept going until the day I walked out the door.
Right.
At which point they were like, don't let it hit you on the way out.
Right. So
bye-bye.
You were feeling, because we hear this from people all the time in Washington, if it's not me, who's going to fight? Somebody has to be the dissenting voice.
And, you know, there were people who came on, even in Washington, and they ended up leaving after their minimum of 2 years. Because even people from academia, Jeremy Stein was on the Federal Reserve Board for 2 years. And he took a gracious out. He said, well, I better get going now because Harvard's going to give up on me. And I'm like, come on. The door's always going to be open at Harvard. Let's get real. But he did his minimum of 2 years and left because he tried to push back and failed. So Fisher was not alone. There were others who tried to speak up, but the majority was so overwhelming that it was just impossible to make your way and be heard.
Would you agree that the biggest heist, the biggest theft in all of human history is being perpetrated right now by the Fed?
The Fed, the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England. It helps to understand that even though the Federal Reserve stopped its quantitative easing campaign, so to speak, stopped expanding the size of its balance sheet by buying U.S. Treasuries, by buying mortgages, that's been over 2 years now. But there are other central banks. We've just come through a record period of buying throughout the world, and investors know, generally speaking, that their back is covered. Their losses will be contained. It's the assumption they work under. I said investors. I didn't say Main Street.
let's start here with a warning of what is to come. And then I want to go backwards. Okay. I want to take you back to when you first saw this housing bubble is going to break and nobody would listen. And take you also back, because you started on Wall Street, and you found that to be a circus and wanted to expose that.
Yes, I have worked in multiple sausage factories.
Yes, you have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so let me first take you to the warning to the average American of what you believe is coming.
So if you turn on any business news network, you're going to hear all kinds of comforting commercials. We're going to take a commercial break now. So they go, inevitably, you're on a beach and life is looking good and the dog is running alongside you, and they'll say, XYZ firm, retirement, it's yours for the taking. And what are they selling exactly? They're selling the beauty of diversification. As long as you spread your risk throughout your bonds and your equities and your real estate, you're going to retire just fine. That's not what happens when central banks are manipulating prices, which they are, the price of interest, the most important price out there. When that inevitably ends poorly, which it has several times since Alan Greenspan took office in 1987, what investors find out and what baby boomers have found out not once but twice is that there's no place to hide. Everything in your 401k, everything in your IRA, they all behave the same, and that is badly.
And you're talking about a crash much different than 2008.
The problem today, as I see it, is that in 2007, 2008, by then the boogeyman had been identified and housing had rolled over. A good friend of mine is Arthur Cash, and he's been on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange for over 50 years. So he's seen a few things in his time. And he said recently that this feels a lot more like 1987 to him. And it feels a lot more like he wasn't around in 1929, but had he been, from what he heard when he was a young man on the floor of the exchange, it's that kind of, it's the melt-ups that we see in the market. It's the days when we have back-to-back and the Dow Jones Industrials puts on 500 points. And on that same day, the Wall Street Journal will be out with a story that says, we're going to have to start valuing stocks differently because it's different this time. And the hair on the back of your neck just stands up and you're like, whoa, don't use those words. Don't say it's different this time. That never ends well. But it's the mania sensation, the sensation that it is just everybody's got to get in. These are the times that really frighten me.
And this time, when I was back at Fox, I remember doing the pension funds and trying to explain them to the American people. And there's no way that these pension funds work. There's just no way they work.
It is impossible.
Right.
It is a mathematical impossibility. Absolutely. People do not understand that you cannot make up for multiple years of missing the amount you're supposed to make on behalf of pensioners investing their money. You cannot have a 6 or 7% per year shortfall compared to what you should have made and expect on planet Earth to make up. It's a mathematical impossibility. And what they're doing to compensate for that is putting retirees and pensioners' money into increasingly risky investments. We'll put it into a distressed real estate fund that, by the way, has no ability to, has no liquidity. So you can't get the money out. This is just great. Let's all it's like NyQuil, but it's not. It's not going to help you sleep at night.
So when that crashes or when people figure out what happens to society?
It's hard to say. You can't get the you can't get the Illinois legislature. You can't get the most crippled pension in the world to try and right the ship. They're at a constant loggerheads. And by the way, Chicago's got the highest murder rate in the country. I ask you if there's, I'm not saying there's causality, but I am saying it's not a coincidence. And eventually what happens is that you continue to cut public services like firemen, like trash pickup, like policemen. You have to start cutting into the bone of what we as average Americans expect and anticipate is ours, by right because we pay our taxes.
Same thing's happening here in Dallas right now with the police.
Oh my God, who knew that you could have a run on a pension?
I know.
I went, wait a minute, I know about runs on banks from my school days, but I've never heard of a run on a pension.
Oh, I have to tell you, if I had a pension and I was close to retirement or I was ready, I would be in there demanding my pension right now too. I'd take, dimes on the dollar for my pension.
And a lot of people want it to, and lo and behold, it almost ran out of money.
Yeah. So then what happens?
That's the question. So then what happens? Because if you're some schmo who's not been on a pension and you've been saving your pennies in a 401k, whittling it away constantly for years, why should your property taxes go through the roof to top off a pension that's had a run and been depleted? These are really difficult questions.
So we have about 4 minutes here. So give me the history of the Fed quickly, so people who don't really understand
what the full minutes. So don't worry.
Yeah. No, I mean just
wow, that's more than enough time.
A general look. It is not part of the federal government. It is a private corporation.
It's a quasi-private organization. So after the expenses of the district presidents, district banks are tended to, then they have to send anything extra they have off to Washington. So it's kind of a hybrid, if you will. But I mean, the dollar in your wallet, the Federal Reserve's job is to protect its buying power. Since 1913, it's protected 3 of those cents of your dollar.
Right.
And it's also supposed to make sure that there are as many people in the workforce as possible, which is a problem because you don't want a bunch of professors trying to maximize employment. You want that in the hands of something called the private sector. But they're mandated with doing it, and so they do. And by keeping interest rates at artificially low levels in order to try and induce hiring, they end up creating a hotbed of financial instability.
Right. We got through the Great Depression of, 21, because the Fed didn't do anything. The federal government slashed taxes and slashed spending. The Fed did nothing, and we got through it in 18 months. In 1929, that's when the federal government and the Fed really started to experiment.
Tinker.
Yes. And they have only gotten worse.
It's like they tanker now. We just made up a new word.
Right. And so now we have, when we hear the Democrats talk about income inequality, it's not really the Republicans' fault. You believe it's the Fed's fault.
I actually go so far as to call out Noam Chomsky because it is the dovish cavalcade. It is the Democrats leading the Fed who have been primarily responsible for income inequality and the growth of that divide over the past decade to the widest on record.
Okay, so a lot of people in our audience will say income inequality. There's always going to be income inequality.
Of course there is.
Yeah.
But a few years ago, we surpassed what it was in 1927, and we've just kept on going because professors believe in trickle-down. Well, trickle-down is a myth. Companies have not taken the largesse provided by the Federal Reserve and done much beyond buying back their shares.
Trickle-down is a myth.
Sorry.
I've never been hired by a poor guy. I mean, when I know that if I get tax cuts, I know as a company owner, I'm going to hire and expand. Now, because of the Fed and because of what Washington is doing, I'm actually going to save this time around. We were just talking about this with the new tax cuts. I'm actually, as a business owner, going to save a lot of that money because I know tough times are coming. And so I'm not going to hire because of the policies in Washington. Is that why trickle-down is a myth, or?
For the past decade, trickle-down has been a myth because if you're Joe Q CEO and you know that the Fed's very visible hand is creating an environment in which you're running your business that is highly artificial, you're not going to invest. You're going to wait until the Fed's out of the way.
Right. So I think we're saying kind of the same thing. Okay. When we come back, I want to take you back, you on Wall Street and seeing the game playing and saying, wait, this is rigged, and then headed towards the Fed to help them expose Wall Street and jumping into the fire.